It hurts. This is my first time. The rancher froze and said, "It'll be over quick. It'll be over quick." Those words left Colton Diaz's mouth before he saw what was really happening. Before he understood that the trembling woman beneath him wasn't just nervous, she was terrified. Before he noticed her eyes weren't closed in anticipation, but squeezed shut, like someone bracing for a beating. Josephine Nelson whispered it again, her voice cracking. "It hurts. This is my first time." It was their wedding night, late spring of 1886, inside a modest ranch house just outside San Luis Obispo, California. The curtains swayed gently in the evening breeze. The bed creaked under their combined weight. Colton had been alone for 8 years since his wife died, giving birth to their stillborn son. Josephine, barely 22, had arrived just 4 days ago from San Francisco as his mail-order bride. But something was catastrophically wrong. Her body wasn't soft or welcoming, it was rigid as iron. Her hands weren't caressing, they were clenched into fists so tight her knuckles had gone white. And when Colton finally looked, really looked, into Josephine's face, he didn't see shyness or modesty. He saw absolute terror. The kind of fear that doesn't come from inexperience, the kind that comes from experience with the wrong kind of man. Colton stopped moving immediately. His calloused rancher's hands, the same hands that could rope a steer and brand cattle without flinching, suddenly became gentle as a whisper. He pulled back, giving her space. "Josephine," he said quietly, "look at me." She wouldn't, couldn't. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, like a trapped animal. That's when Colton saw them. The bruises, old ones, faded to sickly yellow and green, running up both her arms like a twisted road map of violence. Some were months old, some looked older. There were marks around her wrists, too, thin lines that looked like rope burns. Colton's blood ran cold, then hot, then cold again. "Who did this to you?" His voice was barely audible, but it carried the weight of a storm about to break. Josephine started crying, not the delicate tears of a nervous bride. These were deep, guttural sobs, the kind that come from years of buried agony finally breaking the surface. She pulled away from him, wrapped herself in the bedsheet, and sat on the edge of the bed with her back to him, shoulders shaking violently. "My uncle," she finally choked out. "Marcus Webb. After my parents died in the fire 3 years ago, he took me in. He said he'd take care of me." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Colton felt his jaw clench so hard he thought his teeth might crack. He'd seen a lot in his 42 years. War, death, drought, disease. But this was different. This was evil wearing the mask of family. "How long?" Colton asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. 3 years, Josephine whispered. "Every night. And when I tried to fight back the first few times, it only got worse. So I stopped fighting. I just survived." Her voice broke on that last word. "When I saw your advertisement in the San Francisco newspaper," she continued, wiping her eyes with the sheet, "I knew it was my only way out, even if it meant marrying a stranger. Even if it meant crossing the state, I had to escape him." Colton stood up slowly, walked to the wash basin, and wet a clean cloth with cool water. He came back and sat beside Josephine, not touching her, just near her. Close enough to be present, far enough to not feel threatening. "Listen to me real careful," Colton said, his voice steady and calm, despite the rage burning in his chest. "You're safe now. I didn't bring you here to hurt you. I brought you here because I needed a partner, someone to build a life with. And partners don't hurt each other. You understand me?" Josephine looked at him through tear-stained eyes, searching his face for any hint of deception. She found none. She nodded slowly. "We're gonna take this real slow," Colton continued. "There's no rush. We got all the time in the world. Tonight, you sleep in the bed. I'll take the floor. Tomorrow we start over, as friends first. Then we'll see where it goes from there. Deal?" For the first time since arriving in California, Josephine smiled. It was small, fragile, broken, but it was real. "Deal," she whispered. Colton grabbed a blanket and a pillow and made himself a bed on the wooden floor beside the bed. As he lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to Josephine's breathing slowly steady into something resembling sleep, one question burned in his mind like a wildfire. What kind of monster does that to his own flesh and blood for 3 whole years? And more importantly, what would Colton do if that monster ever showed up at his ranch? If this story is stirring something in you, if you've ever known someone who needed to escape, or if you've been that person yourself, then you understand why stories like this matter. This isn't just entertainment. This is truth wrapped in fiction. And if it's reaching you, maybe it needs to reach someone else too. So take a second, hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because healing starts when we stop pretending these things don't happen. The next morning, Josephine woke to something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. The smell of breakfast she didn't have to cook. Back in San Francisco, she'd always been the one in the kitchen before dawn. Marcus would yell if coffee wasn't ready by sunrise. He'd throw the plate if the eggs weren't perfect. But here, in this simple California ranch house, Colton was already at the stove, flipping bacon in a cast-iron skillet like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Morning," Colton said without turning around. "Hope you like your eggs scrambled. I ain't fancy, but I can keep us fed." Josephine sat up slowly, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. In the morning light streaming through the windows, the house looked honest and clean. Nothing like the dark, suffocating rooms she'd escaped from. "You didn't have to do this," Josephine said quietly. "Neither did you when you agreed to marry a stubborn old rancher sight unseen," Colton replied with a half-smile. "Now eat up. We got work to do." Over the next several weeks, Colton taught Josephine everything. How to milk the temperamental cow named Rosie, who had a tendency to kick. How to ride his gentlest horse, a mare called Clementine. How to mend fences and check water troughs. He never rushed her, never raised his voice, never lifted a hand except to help her up when she stumbled. On cool evenings, he'd set up empty bottles on the fence posts and put his spare revolver in her hands. The first few shots rattled her so badly she could barely breathe. The sound of gunfire brought back memories she'd rather forget. Marcus slamming doors, breaking furniture, his fists against walls, and worse. But after a couple of weeks, Josephine could knock a bottle clean off a post at 20 feet. "You're a natural," Colton said one evening, clearly impressed. "I'm motivated," Josephine replied, reloading with steady hands. At first, she flinched every time Colton moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. But slowly, day by day, the flinching stopped. She stopped apologizing for everything. She stopped looking at the floor when she spoke. One afternoon, while they were repairing a section of fence under the brutal California sun, Josephine actually laughed. It was the first real laugh Colton had heard from her. "What's so funny?" Colton asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You," Josephine said, grinning. "You just spent 5 straight minutes cursing at that fence post like it personally insulted your entire family." Colton chuckled. "Well, it's a stubborn post. Runs in the family, I guess." They worked side by side until sunset. And that night, for the first time, Josephine didn't ask Colton to sleep on the floor. You can sleep on the bed," she said nervously. "I trust you." Colton nodded slowly. "Only if you're sure." "I'm sure." They lay on opposite sides of the bed that night, a respectful 2 feet between them. But sometime around midnight, Josephine's hand slowly moved across the sheets. Her fingers found Colton's rough, calloused hand and held it. Colton didn't move, just held her hand back, gentle as holding a newborn chick. 2 weeks later, on a warm June night with the windows open and the smell of jasmine drifting in, Josephine rolled over and kissed Colton for the first time. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. What happened next was slow, careful, and nothing like that first night of terror. Colton kept asking if she was okay. She kept saying yes. And when it was over, Josephine cried again. But this time, Colton understood. These were different tears. "Thank you," she whispered into his chest. "Thank you for being patient." Colton kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for giving an old man a second chance at something real." But 300 miles north in San Francisco, Marcus Webb was reading a letter from a mutual acquaintance who'd seen Josephine in San Luis Obispo, and he was absolutely furious. Marcus Webb sat in his dim San Francisco study, the letter crumpled in his fist, his face twisted with rage. "Little ungrateful wretch," he muttered, pouring himself another whiskey. "Thought she could just run off and start over. Thought I'd just let her go." For 3 years, Josephine had been his property, his entertainment, his punching bag when the whiskey hit wrong. And now some California rancher thought he could just marry her and take what belonged to him. Not a chance. Marcus had connections. He knew people, and more importantly, he knew how to manipulate the law when he needed to. He penned a letter to the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff, carefully crafting a story about a niece who'd stolen money and valuables before fleeing San Francisco. He claimed she'd taken a family heirloom, a gold locket worth $300, and disappeared in the night with his best horse. All lies, of course. But lies told convincingly enough become truth in the eyes of the law. Within 2 weeks, Marcus was on a train heading south, accompanied by a deputy he'd bribed with promises of a cut of the recovered property. Back at the ranch, Josephine and Colton were oblivious to the approaching storm. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm. Mornings were for ranch work, afternoons for teaching Josephine to read better, something Marcus had always forbidden. Evenings for sitting on the porch, watching the sun paint the California hills gold and red. "I never knew life could be like this," Josephine said one evening, her head resting on Colton's shoulder. "Like what?" Colton asked. "Peaceful, safe, normal." Colton squeezed her hand. "You deserve it, Josephine, every bit of it." She smiled, but somewhere deep in her chest, an old familiar dread was starting to stir. She couldn't explain it, couldn't name it. But she'd learned to trust that feeling over the past 3 years. It had kept her alive. "Colton," she said quietly, "what if he comes looking for me?" "Your uncle?" "Yes." Colton was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, walked into the house and came back with his rifle. He sat back down and laid it across his lap. "If he comes," Colton said simply, "he'll regret it." Josephine wanted to believe him, but she'd seen what Marcus was capable of. She'd seen him charm police officers and clergy alike. She'd watched him lie with a smile and manipulate his way out of every consequence. "He's not like other men," Josephine warned. "He's slippery, dangerous." "So am I when someone threatens what's mine," Colton replied. "And you're mine now, Josephine. Not in the way he thought he owned you, but in the way that matters. You're my wife, my partner, and I'll be damned if I let him take you back." Josephine felt tears sting her eyes, but these were different tears too. These were tears of gratitude. 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning in early July, Josephine was hanging laundry outside when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. 2 men on horseback. One was a deputy she didn't recognize. The other was Marcus Webb. Josephine's entire body turned to ice. The wet sheet she was holding dropped to the ground. Her vision tunneled. Her breathing stopped. Marcus smiled, that oily, predatory smile she knew so well. "Hello, Josephine," he called out, dismounting slowly. "Miss me?" Colton was in the barn when he heard Josephine scream. Not a scream of pain, a scream of pure terror. He grabbed his rifle and sprinted outside, boots kicking up dust, heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. What he saw made his blood boil. Marcus Webb stood about 10 feet from Josephine, who'd backed herself against the side of the house, eyes wide with fear. The deputy stood nearby, looking uncomfortable but official. "Get away from her," Colton barked, raising the rifle. Marcus held up his hands in mock surrender, that infuriating smile never leaving his face. "Easy, friend. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to retrieve my niece and the property she stole from me." "Your niece is my wife," Colton said, his voice dangerously calm. "Legal and proper. We got the papers filed in town 3 months ago. She doesn't belong to you." "She stole from me," Marcus insisted, turning to the deputy. "Tell him, Deputy Carson, tell him about the gold locket and the money." Deputy Carson shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, Mr. Webb here has filed a formal complaint. Says your wife took $300 worth of property and a valuable family heirloom before she left San Francisco. That's a serious crime." "He's lying," Josephine said, her voice shaking but growing stronger. "I never took anything from him. I left with the clothes on my back and nothing else." "She's a liar and a thief," Marcus said smoothly. "Always has been. Ever since her parents died, and I took her in out of the goodness of my heart. She's been nothing but trouble." "Goodness of your heart?" Josephine's voice suddenly cracked like a whip. "Is that what you call it? Goodness?" She stepped forward, away from the wall, and before Colton could stop her, she started unbuttoning her sleeve. "Josephine, you don't have to," Colton started. "Yes, I do," she said firmly. She rolled up both sleeves, revealing the landscape of scars, bruises, and marks that still hadn't fully healed. Then she turned around and lifted the back of her dress slightly, showing similar marks across her back. Deputy Carson's face went pale. "This is the goodness he's talking about," Josephine said, her voice steady now despite the tears streaming down her face. 3 years of this, every night. And when I tried to fight back, it got worse. So I stopped fighting. I just survived until I could escape." Marcus's smile faltered for just a moment. "She's lying. Those could be from anything. 3 years' worth of anything," Colton interrupted, stepping between Marcus and Josephine. "You want to keep lying, or you want to get off my property before I shoot you for trespassing?" Deputy Carson looked at Marcus with disgust. "Mr. Webb, I think we need to have a conversation back in town about these allegations." "Allegations?" Marcus sputtered. "I'm the victim here." "The only thing you're a victim of is your own sickness," Colton said. "Now get off my land, both of you. And if you ever come back here, if you ever go near my wife again, they'll be digging your grave before sunset." Deputy Carson nodded slowly. "Mr. Diaz, I apologize for the intrusion. Mr. Webb, we're leaving. Now." But Marcus wasn't done. Not by a long shot. As he climbed back onto his horse, he locked eyes with Josephine. "This isn't over, girl. You hear me? You still belong to me." and I always collect what's mine." Then he rode off, Deputy Carson trailing behind him with a look of deep unease on his face. Josephine collapsed into Colton's arms the moment they were out of sight, shaking uncontrollably. "He'll come back," she whispered. "I know him. He'll come back." Colton held her tight. "Then I'll be ready." But what neither of them knew was that Marcus Webb had already made plans, dark plans that didn't involve deputies or the law. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. No visits, no letters, no signs of Marcus Webb. But Josephine couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She kept looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, checking the windows at night. Colton tried to reassure her, but he was uneasy too. He'd seen men like Marcus before, men who couldn't stand losing control. They didn't just give up and go home. They plotted. So Colton started taking precautions. He kept his rifle closer. He taught Josephine where he kept his spare revolver. He even hired a ranch hand named Miguel to help with the work and serve as an extra set of eyes. "You think he'll really come back?" Miguel asked one afternoon while they were repairing the barn door. "I know he will," Colton replied. "Men like that don't just walk away." Miguel nodded grimly. "Then we'll be ready." Meanwhile, Josephine was changing. The fear was still there, but something else was growing alongside it. Anger. For 3 years she'd been powerless, trapped, owned, but not anymore. One evening she was practicing her shooting while Colton watched from the porch. She hit 6 bottles in a row without missing. "You're getting good," Colton called out. "I'm getting ready," Josephine corrected, reloading with steady hands. That night, as they lay in bed, Josephine spoke into the darkness. "If he comes back, I want to face him." "Josephine, I need to," she insisted. "I spent 3 years running from him, letting him control me through fear. If I don't face him now, I'll be running forever." Colton was quiet for a long moment. Then he squeezed her hand. "Then we face him together." She smiled in the darkness. "Together. Maybe you're watching this late at night, or maybe you're listening while you work. But if this story is hitting you somewhere deep, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself after someone tried to break you, then you already know this isn't just a story. This is someone's truth, maybe even yours. So if this matters to you, if you want to see where Josephine's courage takes her, then subscribe. Not for me, for her, for everyone who's had to find their strength in the darkest places. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this community is bigger than you think. 2 days later, Colton rode into town for supplies. Josephine wanted to go with him, but he insisted she stay at the ranch with Miguel. "I'll be back before sunset," Colton promised, kissing her forehead. But sunset came and went, then twilight, then full darkness. Colton didn't come home. Josephine paced the porch like a caged animal, her anxiety growing with every passing minute. "He should have been back hours ago," she said for the 10th time. Miguel stood nearby, rifle in hand, equally concerned. Maybe the wagon broke down. Maybe he stopped at the Harrison Ranch to help with something. But Josephine knew better. She could feel it in her bones. Something was wrong. "I'm going into town," she announced, heading for the barn. "Mrs. Diaz, it's dark. Let me go." "No," Josephine said firmly. "You stay here and watch the ranch. If I'm not back by dawn, then you ride for the sheriff." She saddled Clementine with shaking hands, grabbed Colton's spare revolver, and rode toward town under the light of a half-moon. The ride felt like it took hours, though it was only 40 minutes. When she reached the edge of San Luis Obispo, she saw Colton's wagon parked outside the general store, the horse still hitched but looking agitated. But no Colton. Josephine dismounted and rushed into the store. The owner, Mr. Patterson, looked up in surprise. "Mrs. Diaz? What are you doing here so late?" "Where's my husband?" Josephine demanded. "His wagon is outside, but he's not here." Mr. Patterson's face grew serious. "He was here earlier, bought his supplies, loaded up the wagon. Then some fellow came in asking to speak with him privately. They stepped outside, and I haven't seen him since. That was, about 4 hours ago." "What fellow?" Josephine's voice was sharp with fear. "Didn't recognize him. Tall, well-dressed, spoke like a city man, had a deputy with him." Josephine's blood turned to ice. Marcus. She ran back outside, looking for any sign of Colton. That's when she noticed something on the ground near the wagon. Colton's hat lying in the dirt. Colton never took his hat off unless he was indoors or sleeping. And there was something else. A small piece of paper pinned to the wagon seat with a knife. Josephine's hands trembled as she unfolded it. The note was written in Marcus's distinctive handwriting. "You want your husband back alive. You'll come to the old mining camp 5 miles north of town. Alone, before dawn. Or I'll make sure they never find his body. You know I'll do it, Josephine. You know what I'm capable of." Josephine felt the world tilt beneath her feet. This was her fault. Marcus didn't care about Colton. He cared about control, about owning her. And he'd taken the one person who'd shown her what real love looked like. She looked at the note again, then at the revolver on her hip. She had 2 choices. Go to the sheriff and risk Marcus killing Colton while they organized a rescue, or go alone and face the monster she'd been running from. But really, there was only one choice. Josephine climbed back onto Clementine and turned her north, toward the abandoned mining camp in the hills. She was done running. The old mining camp was a graveyard of broken dreams, abandoned buildings with collapsed roofs, rusted equipment scattered like bones, and the entrance to a played-out silver mine that looked like the mouth of hell itself. Josephine arrived just before dawn, the sky still dark but starting to lighten at the edges. She dismounted quietly and tied Clementine to a tree far enough away that the horse wouldn't be in danger. Then she checked the revolver one more time and walked into the camp. "I'm here, Marcus," she called out, her voice echoing off the empty buildings. "Let him go!" For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then Marcus stepped out of one of the larger buildings, smiling that horrible smile. He was holding a rifle pointed casually at the ground. "There's my girl," he said, "right on time. I always knew you were obedient when properly motivated." "Where is he?" Josephine demanded. Marcus gestured toward the mine entrance. "Safe and sound for now. Whether he stays that way depends entirely on you." "What do you want?" "What do I want?" Marcus laughed. "I want what's mine. You're coming back to San Francisco with me, Josephine. Tonight. Right now." "I'm never going anywhere with you again," Josephine said, her hand moving closer to her revolver. Marcus noticed and raised his rifle. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. You draw that gun, and my associate in the mine puts a bullet in your husband's head. And trust me, at this range, in that enclosed space, he won't miss." Josephine froze. "That's better," Marcus said. "Now, here's how this is going to work. You're going to walk over here, nice and slow. You're going to hand me that gun. And then we're going to take a little trip back north. Maybe along the way. I'll decide whether your rancher friend gets to live or not." "You're insane," Josephine said. "I'm practical," Marcus corrected. "You belonged to me for 3 years. You don't just get to leave because you found some broken-down cowboy who thinks he can save you. Nobody saves you, Josephine. Nobody but me." Josephine looked at the mine entrance, then back at Marcus. Her mind raced. She could draw the gun and shoot, but then Colton would die. She could surrender and hope for a chance to escape later, but Marcus would never give her that chance. "All right," Josephine said, her voice suddenly calm. "You win." Marcus grinned triumphantly. I always do. Josephine started walking toward him, slow and deliberate. Her hand moved away from her revolver. She kept her eyes down, playing the role of the defeated victim one last time. Marcus lowered his rifle slightly, confident in his victory. That was his mistake. Because Josephine wasn't the same terrified girl who'd left San Francisco 3 months ago. She'd learned to shoot. She'd learned to fight. And most importantly, she'd learned that monsters are only scary until you stop believing they're invincible. When she was about 10 feet away, Josephine suddenly dropped to the ground, rolled to the left, and drew her revolver in one fluid motion. Marcus tried to raise his rifle, but he was too slow. Josephine fired. The shot echoed through the mining camp like thunder. The bullet caught Marcus in the shoulder, spinning him backward. The rifle flew from his hands and clattered across the ground. He screamed, a high-pitched, pathetic sound that shattered his aura of invincibility like glass. Josephine was on her feet instantly, keeping the revolver trained on him as she kicked his rifle away. "You shot me!" Marcus shrieked, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "You actually shot me!" "You're lucky it was the shoulder," Josephine said coldly. "Now call off whoever you have in that mine, or the next one goes somewhere worse." "There's nobody in the mine, you stupid girl," Marcus spat, his face twisted with pain and rage. "I was bluffing. Your husband is probably still in town, wondering what happened to his wagon." Josephine felt relief flood through her, but she didn't lower the gun. "So you lied. Again. What a surprise." "You're going to regret this," Marcus hissed. "Do you know who I am? What I can do? I'll have you arrested. I'll have you hanged for attempted murder." "No," said a voice from behind him. "You won't." Deputy Carson stepped out from behind one of the abandoned buildings, his own gun drawn. Behind him was the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff, a hard-faced man named Warren. "We've been following you since you left town, Mr. Webb," Sheriff Warren said. "Deputy Carson here told me about your first visit to the Diaz ranch, about the accusations that didn't quite add up. So when he saw you talking to that rancher earlier today, he got suspicious and came to me." Marcus's face went white. "She shot me. You saw it. She's the criminal here." "What I saw," Deputy Carson said slowly, "was a man with a rifle threatening an unarmed woman. What I saw was you admitting to fabricating a hostage situation to lure her here. What I saw was self-defense." "We've also been doing some investigating up in San Francisco," Sheriff Warren added. "Sent some telegrams to colleagues up there. Turns out you're a well-known figure in certain circles, Mr. Webb. Gambling debts, questionable business dealings, and some disturbing questions about your relationship with your late brother's daughter." Marcus started to speak, but Sheriff Warren cut him off. "You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it. You're under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and about 6 other charges I'll think of on the ride back to town. Deputy, bind his wound and cuff him." As Deputy Carson moved forward to restrain Marcus, Josephine finally lowered her gun. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "Mrs. Diaz," Sheriff Warren said gently, "your husband is safe. We had him wait at my office when we realized what was happening. He's worried sick about you." Is he really okay?" Josephine asked, her voice cracking. "He's fine, angry, but fine. Come on, let's get you back to town." As they walked back to where the horses were waiting, Josephine looked back one last time at Marcus, now cuffed and bleeding, being loaded into the back of a wagon. He looked small suddenly, powerless, human. The monster in her nightmares was just a broken, pathetic man who'd ruled through fear because he had nothing else. "It's over," Sheriff Warren said quietly. "Really over this time." Josephine nodded, but she didn't truly believe it until she saw Colton running toward her down the main street of San Luis Obispo, his face etched with worry and relief. When they collided, Colton wrapped her in his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "I thought I lost you," he said into her hair. "You didn't," Josephine replied, "and nobody's taking me from you. Not ever. But the real question was, could they actually build a life after all this darkness? 3 months later, winter settled gently over San Luis Obispo County. Marcus Webb was in prison awaiting trial. His San Francisco business partners had abandoned him. His properties were being seized to pay debts. And most importantly, he was 300 miles away and never coming back. Deputy Carson had testified about the bruises and scars. Sheriff Warren had compiled witness statements from San Francisco neighbors who'd heard screaming from Marcus's house late at night. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But for Josephine and Colton, justice wasn't about revenge. It was about finally being able to move forward without looking over their shoulders. The ranch had become a real home. They'd expanded the garden, built a new chicken coop. Miguel had become not just a ranch hand, but a friend, often joining them for dinner and sharing stories about his own family. And slowly, carefully, Josephine was healing. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at unexpected loud noises, but the good days outnumbered the bad days now, and the bad days were getting fewer. One evening in December, as they sat by the fireplace with snow falling softly outside, Josephine spoke words she'd been holding inside for weeks. "I'm pregnant." Colton looked at her in shock, then joy, then concern. How do you feel about that?" Josephine smiled, a real, full smile that reached her eyes. Terrified. Excited, happy, all of it at once. "We'll figure it out together," Colton said, taking her hand. "I know we will," Josephine replied, "because that's what partners do." Over the following months, as Josephine's belly grew, so did her confidence. She was no longer the terrified girl who'd arrived on that train. She was a woman who'd faced her demons and won. She worked alongside Colton until the day her water broke in the middle of feeding the chickens. Miguel rode for the doctor, while Colton paced nervously outside the bedroom door. 12 hours later, as dawn broke over the California hills, a baby girl was born. "What should we name her?" Colton asked, cradling his daughter with tears streaming down his weathered face. Josephine thought for a moment, looking at the tiny, perfect creature they'd created. "Hope," she said. "Let's call her Hope, because that's what she is." And so Hope Diaz entered the world, born not from darkness, but from the light that follows it. 5 years later, summer of 1891, Hope Diaz was a whirlwind of energy, running through the ranch with her dark curls bouncing, chasing chickens, and laughing at absolutely everything. She had her father's stubbornness and her mother's courage, though she was too young to understand what courage really meant. Josephine watched her daughter play from the porch, one hand resting on her belly where baby number 2 was growing. This pregnancy was easier than the first. Her body knew what to expect, and her mind was at peace. Colton came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years, he said softly. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago," Josephine replied. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday." "Any regrets?" Josephine turned to face him. "Not a single one." She meant it. The scars were still there, both the visible ones on her arms and the invisible ones in her heart. But they didn't define her anymore. They were just part of her story, not the whole story. "Mama!" Hope called out, running up the porch steps. "Look what I found!" She held out a small wildflower, slightly crushed from being clutched in her tiny hand. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Josephine said, kneeling down to her daughter's level. "What should we do with it?" "Put it in water, so it stays pretty." As Hope ran inside to find a jar for her flower, Josephine stood back up and looked out over the ranch. the land they'd built together, the life they'd created from ashes. "What are you thinking about?" Colton asked. "I'm thinking about second chances," Josephine said. "About how sometimes the darkest nights lead to the brightest mornings. About how I almost gave up. But I didn't." "I'm glad you didn't," Colton said, pulling her close. "Me too." That evening, after Hope was tucked into bed with a story about brave princesses and kind ranchers, Josephine sat on the porch alone, watching the stars emerge one by one. She thought about the girl she'd been. Broken, scared, convinced she'd never be free. She thought about Marcus, rotting in prison, powerless and forgotten. And she thought about everyone else out there, still trapped in their own private hells, convinced there was no way out. If she could send them a message, it would be simple. There is always a way out. It might be terrifying. It might require more courage than you think you have. But you have it. And on the other side of that fear is a life worth living. "Josephine," Colton called from inside. "You coming to bed?" "In a minute," she replied. But she sat there a while longer, under the California stars, feeling grateful for every hard-won moment of peace. Because this was what healing looked like. Not the absence of scars, but the presence of joy despite them. Not forgetting the darkness, but refusing to let it win. You made it to the end. That means something. Not everyone does. Not everyone can sit with these hard truths. But you did. And if this story meant something to you, if Josephine's courage reminds you of your own, or someone you love, then maybe you'll share it. Hit that subscribe button, not because I asked,